Welcome everyone for joining Asian Leadership Conference today. On February 24th, Russia invaded Ukraine. So now we are facing a great threat for the security and economy. And it is not only for a problem for European nations, but also for the global world, including Korea. Against this backdrop, North Korea continues its military actions, including missile launch. And now we have a threat that North Korea will restart its military actions, including the missile test launch, which has been suspended for a short time. So now experiencing a great threat of economy and security all around the world. And for that, we invite 3 representatives from FMC in order to discuss the current issues and get the solutions with their wisdoms. I am working as the president of the University of North Korean Studies at the moment. Before that, I used to be Korea's ambassador to the US from 2013. And at that time, I recognized the FMC, which is the abbreviation for the former members of Congress. Based on my experience in Washington, FMC members are great experts with significant roles even after their retirement. Therefore, it is my great honor to invite 3 representatives and members of FMC for today's event. So I'd like to introduce today's panelists. So first, we invite Jay Kim. Currently, we have many Korean members at FMC, but he is the first member of FMC as Korean. And I believe you know how hard it is to be the first one for any institutions. Currently, he is operating Kim Chang-jun Research Centers and playing an active role. So from now on, I'd like to introduce in English.
The second panelist is Honorable Don Bonker, and Don Bonker used to be Democratic congressman coming from the state of Washington, and he used to be a leading member of Foreign Affairs Committee, and then he used to be chairman of International Economy at the Foreign Affairs Committee. And then in that capacity, he worked extensively on international economic issues at the US Congress. And third panelist is Honorable Curt Weldon. Curt Weldon used to be Republican congressman coming from state of Pennsylvania, and he in fact used to be a very important leader of Armed Services Committee as well as Homeland Security Committee. In that capacity, Honorable Weldon in fact used to come and visit large number of trouble areas, I have to say trouble areas around the world, including no less than 3 visits to North Korea. So it is such an honor to be moderating a session with such distinguished panelists. So, first of all, let us just try to discuss some issues related with Russian invasion of Ukraine. And Russia, of course, is a formidable military power, but somehow Ukraine, for the time being, is hanging on with remarkable tenacity. And then because of it, I think there are a large number of scenarios of endgame. And in my view, there are 2 factors which will determine the shape of the endgame. One of them would be how effective the economic sanction against Russia will be. And second factor in my mind would be how effective would be Ukrainian resistance against Russian invasion. So between these 2 factors, Honorable Bonker, let me turn you for the first question, which is, well, with respect to this economic sanction, how effective do you think economic sanctions have been so far? And related question would be, economic sanctions by its very nature hurt not only Russia, but also the West European countries as well as Korea. So how long do you think we'll be able to maintain this solidarity among Western Europe, United States, and Asia? Third related question would be, when even before Russian invasion of Ukraine, we were talking about fragmentation of international economy. And I'm concerned this Russian invasion of Ukraine will even further strengthen this inclination trend of fragmentation of world economy. So what is your views on these important questions?
Well, thank you, Ambassador, for how you've put forth that question. And it's a challenge to keep it brief, but I shall do so. First of all, you put your finger on the most fundamental question. Are sanctions effective? For decades, U.S. foreign policy has applied sanctions for a variety of reasons, be they human rights, corruption, security threats, and so forth. During my years in Congress, I did chair the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee that had jurisdiction over sanctions, conducted a number of hearings. And the bottom line is they're not that effective. They're not a good weapon to counter the kind of actions we see Russia taking today. But this time, it's different. And they're going to be effective. Why? Well, number one, they're being employed in a way that's tougher and quicker than ever before. Number two, in the past, it's been U.S. unilateral sanctions. So a country like Iran or Russia could simply ignore us and then pivot to other countries, and that reduces their effectiveness. This time, it's not only the US and NATO, it's most countries in the world that are participating in various forms of sanctions to punish Russia for their horrendous actions in Ukraine. Secondly, we have gone after the largest companies in Russia, the energy, Gazprom, Rosneft. That produces Russia's greatest revenue. And the most dramatic action has been Germany's decision to shut down that newly constructed pipeline. And of course, it provides needed natural gas to Germany and other European countries, but it's going to be a big setback for Russia. All the cost of building that pipeline, now there's no revenue. Also, British Petroleum, Shell, other major U.S. corporations that had relations with Rosneft, these other countries, are now withdrawing their investments. So it's going to have a crippling effect on their number one industry. Second is the financial industry. We've never really employed sanctions on the financial sector, and this time it's going to be a stranglehold on Russia. They're already feeling the pain from actions on the financial sector. It's financial is global. There are networks. And suddenly they've isolated Russia. It's going to make it far more difficult. Also, it's not just government, but U.S. companies privately are taking action. Boeing, Airbus, shutting down maintenance and repair and other needed services and equipment for the Russia Airlines. That's shutting down. And finally, the most recent action was removing Russia from the most favorable nation status, that is trade. It's not going to have a huge impact, but it simply allows countries now to impose higher tariffs on trade with Russia. So this is much different than we've ever seen in the past. Will it be effective? Well, a former State Department official, Steve Pfeiffer, once said, sanctions are not an end to themselves and should not be treated as such. So again, what impact? Well, in the short term, I'm not sure it's going to deter Putin's ambitious efforts to take over Ukraine, to put his puppet government in place, because he's not looking at the long term. He's just trying to gain a military victory. So in the short term, it may or may not have an effect. No, it will have an effect. Will it be sufficient to have him back away, withdraw his troops, enter negotiations? We'll see. But in the longer term, it's going to have a devastating effect on Russia. You know, Russia, I've been involved, as Curt Weldon has, with Russia for so many years. It's taken 20, 30 years to build up their kind of economy, be a global player. And all that is being shut down almost immediately. And that's going to be pain that's not only felt with the oligarchs and the corporations who are getting hit front on, but it's going to trickle down to regular citizens on the streets of Moscow. Right now, they love McDonald's, shut down. Starbucks, shut down. So ordinary citizens, despite the kind of propaganda that's fueling Putin's war efforts, they're going to feel the pain, and it's going to be a huge stain on the Vladimir Putin legacy.
Well, Honorable Bonker, thank you so much for your observation. Thank you so much for your observation. Well, as a matter of fact, when it comes from you, a gentleman who have such extensive experiences of dealing with sanction matters, well, that in fact is a very reassuring message when it comes from you. So thank you so much. So
Thank you, Ambassador.
Well, Honorable Curt Weldon, let me turn to you for my second question, which is, as I already said, between the two factors which will determine the shape of the end game for the Ukrainian incident, then of course the second factor would be how effectively Ukraine would be able to resist the Russian invasion. So given your long experiences of dealing with military issues, what do you think about the prospect of Ukrainian resistance? And then there is Tony Blinken, Secretary of State Tony Blinken, who in fact says in the long run, Russia will meet with strategic defeat because of what it has done in Ukraine. So, well, I'm pretty sure you must have your own views about what Secretary Blinken means by strategic defeat. So could we hear from you?
Well, first of all, thank you, Ambassador, for hosting this event. And I want to thank our friends in Korea for inviting Congressman Bonker and I to join you. And let me also congratulate the Koreans for an outstanding election and welcome President Yoon as a friend to the U.S. and offer my support to assist in any way I can in strengthening our already solid relationships. I spent the bulk of my career focusing on foreign affairs from the standpoint of being the vice chairman of the Armed Services and Homeland Security Committees. My goal was to avoid war, but always present the image of a bipartisan Congress supporting the president, whoever that might have been, in trying to find peaceful resolution. My first trip to the Soviet Union was in 1985, when the Soviet Union was on the verge of collapsing. And then entering Congress in 1987, I led 60 bipartisan delegations to Russia and to Ukraine. With our good friend Marcy Kaptur, I started and chaired the Ukraine-Rada Congress relationship. And we had numerous interactive sessions with our parliamentarians in both Kiev and in Washington. We worked very closely with the Ukraine diaspora, which in the U.S. is very strong and very powerful and influential. At the same time we did that, and President Kuchma was in office at the time, followed by our friend President Yushchenko, we started a similar initiative with the Russian Duma. Steny Hoyer was my co-chair. And that caucus of Duma Congress was operating at the same time to build relationships and understanding. So I start off my comments tonight and answering your question with sadness, because this should not have occurred. In fact, in 2000, when President Putin came into power, the Congress stood together and prepared a 48-page document with 108 recommendations. I was the author of that document that was co-signed by Senator Joe Biden, Senator Carl Levin, Senator Dick Lugar, Congressman now Senator Bernie Sanders, and Congressman Mike Pence, along with 200 other members of the House and the Senate. We had a plan to work together. We did the same thing in the Ukraine with the Rada. And unfortunately, as the Congress came together and the Rada and the Duma passed those same documents unanimously, our administrations of both parties failed to follow through and take advantage. In fact, the Russian Academy of Sciences unanimously endorsed the document we did with Russia. But we are where we are today. I'm extremely sad because I have many friends in Ukraine. And I'm very sad by the killing that's taking place and the outrageous behavior of President Putin against innocent citizens throughout Ukraine. But I know the Ukraine people well. From my early days as a mayor and county commissioner, I learned the phrase Slava Ukraini, which is the glory and power to Ukraine. There's a spirit among the Ukraine people. And we're seeing that now in the president and the leaders of the country who are banding together. Ukraine has always had an effective military. It's extremely sad at this point in time that when Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons, we assured Ukraine that they didn't need nuclear weapons for deterrence. We and the rest of the world would protect them. Ukraine gave up that arsenal, and today the people are standing together with their rifles and their shotguns. I believe that the Ukraine people are showing a common purpose that we've not seen in our lifetime. We've already seen that recently in the recent attempts to enter Kiev. And I have ongoing communication with friends throughout Ukraine. I'm involved in supplies. I'm involved in assisting in a number of ways. So I'm getting daily reports. The problem is that Russia's military is so large and so strong, without an air corridor protected for Ukraine, the Russians will, in fact, commit more atrocities against the Ukrainian people, housing facilities, condominiums, places of worship, and it's going to be extremely difficult for Ukraine to fight that off. But I'm doing everything I can, and I know the American people are rallying behind Ukraine. We're promoting and pushing and supporting President Biden in his efforts to provide the support materials, as he recently did, for the anti-tank weapons, the anti-missile weapons. I would hope that we can get some S-300s into Ukraine from the neighboring NATO countries that can allow them to take out Russia's offensive aircraft. The S-300 is one of the most sophisticated air defense systems actually built by Russia. But there are units available that should be brought in discreetly into Ukraine today. In terms of where we go from here, I applaud Tony Blinken for his efforts and his aggressiveness in rallying our NATO allies. But there has to be a direct dialogue with President Putin. Now, in my travels to Russia, I made many friends. Valentina Matvienko, probably my closest friend. Today, she is the senior female woman advising Putin as the chairman of the Federation Council or Senate. Sergei Chemisev was Putin's boss in the KGB. He visited my office after he left the KGB and FSB and formed and was the head of Rostechnology, all manufacturing in Russia. And Ambassador Ushakov, who was based in the US and now advises Putin. And Sechin and Surkov and Yevgeny Velikov, who worked with us in the non-Lugar program. I have reached out to each of them in a personal plea to get to President Putin for face-to-face meetings. In fact, I volunteered to my friend Joe Biden, who I've worked with for 35 years and grew up 15 minutes away. Our children went to the same high school that Joe went to. We've been very close friends. I've offered to lead a delegation quietly of former members who Putin respects, to sit down with him and let him know that this is unacceptable and a ceasefire must take place immediately. We can help work out the differences here. And those of us who worked with Russia, who during the dark days of the early 2000s, when Putin made significant overtures and we backed away from those offers, I know them all. I documented them all. They've not been made public. Perhaps one day they should be made. That doesn't excuse any of the behavior of President Putin. But I believe in the end, the best way we can support the Ukraine people and support Secretary Blinken is to have a face-to-face dialogue with President Putin. And I think those of us who have interacted with that country for the past 20 years need to stand up at this time and support our president, NATO, and most importantly, the people of Ukraine, to let President Putin know this is unacceptable. That's what I'm doing back in Washington, working with the chief counsel for President Biden, who I've known since Biden was a senator, Steve Ricchetti. And I've rallied some of my friends on both sides of the aisle to say that we're willing to stand up and travel to Moscow to let our voices be heard. I don't want to solve this only through military. We've got to solve it with a direct dialogue. As dangerous as that might be, now is the time for action. I support the sanctions. All the ones that Congressman Bonker mentioned, I support. I would hope that President Biden would unleash their own energy, so that would further strangle the sale of Russian energy, especially to other nations around the world. But I can't control that. What I can do as a former member is offer myself to support this president and NATO and the people of Ukraine to try to bring some common sense and decency to President Putin and his government.
Well, Honorable Weldon, two things really stood out from what I just heard from you. The first thing, which in fact was very impressive in your statement, was how you describe the Ukrainian people, and then the expression you used was the sense of common purpose, very strong sense of common purpose that Ukrainian people used to have, and then as a matter of fact, which in fact is hardened even further because of Russian invasion of Ukraine presently. So that word in fact really stood out. And then as a matter of fact, the emphasis you placed upon the importance of supplying military weapons to Ukrainians so that they could use their sense of common purpose combined with the effective military weapons. That really stood out. But at the same time, the second point which really stood out was your plea so that, well, in addition to sanction, in addition to military resistance, at the same time, we must take full advantage of opportunities for dialogue. It really stood out to me. And then what you said, you in fact used to be a member of Congress no less than 20 years. And then during those 20 years, then of course you developed huge network of important interlocutors in Russia as well as in Ukraine. So I think many Korean audience would understand you when you say you in fact wish to make best use of this extensive human networking you have made so far. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Last month, I hosted Ilya Panamarov at the Foreign Policy Research Institute in Philadelphia. Ilya was the only member of the Russian Duma to vote against Putin in the invasion of Ukraine.
Oh, I see.
Ilya
Oh, I
today
see.
is in Kiev fighting with the Ukrainians against his Russian native country. There are many Russians that feel that way, but we need to take this message personally to President Putin from someone and from a group of people in both parties who he understands worked with him starting in 2000, built relationships, tried to push an agenda. But he has to understand that what he's doing militarily in Ukraine is totally unacceptable. It's immoral, and it's got to stop.
Thank you, Honorable Weldon. Well, Honorable Jay Kim, let me turn to you. In Korea, of course, we are closely watching all those developments in Ukraine, and I think in Korea we have already started to talk about the lessons. And I listen to them, and some of them say, "Well, look at that. Look at what is happening in Ukraine." The thing is, well, the allies, treaty allies of the United States, they've never been subject to such an attack. So the lesson is obvious in the sense of we must strengthen our military capability, but at the same time, we must strengthen our alliance with the United States. So there is one school of thought. But at the same time, on the other side, there are people who are saying, well, what is the lesson? We must, in fact, avoid being entangled in big power politics. We must maintain free hand and make decisions issue by issue, case by case, that in fact will best protect our national interests. So that's another very different, say orientation of thoughts. So given all these different views, what do you think is the appropriate lesson we should be learning from Russian invasion of Ukraine?
Well, thank you for giving me this opportunity. And I agree with two gentlemen. By the way, good to talk to you again. And my colleagues did a wonderful job talking about situations and what America will do as a policy. But I want to talk about what's going to happen to Korea. The Korea, if you look at the geographical layout, God, we are surrounded by China and Russia. Now, what's going to happen to China? That's my biggest concern. They're going to be involved in this war? Or then what's going to happen to North Korea? Then what's going to happen to Korean Peninsula? I am a little concerned about that. China and Russia they signed a partnership. So if China is going to be involved in this war, well, then it's going to be a real tricky. We are caught in right between. I am a little concerned what's going to happen to that China's movement. Eventually, fuck the North Korea as well. And so that's got a little scared. Now, all this Chinese has a tremendous power, and North Korea is continually testing this ICBM, which is we are within the target. And by looking at this military point of view, we really don't have anything to fight back. And now we got a new president, which is excellent news, good news. He's a very, I say, pro-America, and he believes in strong the ownership and all these nuclear weapons. And he got a pretty good idea. He's almost like a Republican in USA, which I'm a Republican. So his highest priority is defense. I'm glad. I think it's going to be all right. He'll study on this defense. What's going to happen to this new Ukraine war? It's going to be eventually spread out to Korea and China. What's going to happen to China? China is going to participate. How about North Korea? They're going to participate also. Then we got caught between South Korea, but very small, half of the Korea. I think that's a big concern I have. I live in Korea right now. I live in Yeouido, looking at this National Assembly building every day. Beautiful, beautiful country, beautiful nation. We're doing the right thing. But what's going to happen to another war? I was there, Korean War, when I was a kid, and walked through all the down to Daejeon. I don't want to go through that again. So I'm more concerned about the Korea and Japan. I mean China and North Korea situation than Europe. What's happening in Europe? Maybe I'm a little selfish, but Nobody mentioning about that. What's going to happen to China? I hope that China doesn't get involved in this thing. But knowing China and Russian relationship, I don't know what would happen. China may be actively involved in Ukraine war and joining Russia. Then what happened to Korea? And also what happened to North Korea? That is my big concern. I am studying it, to be honest with you. What could happen? I asked a few people. It's concern. We have a U.S. relationship, an excellent relationship, and I'm sure they can kind of take care of this. But again, we gotta think about this, and we got a new president, thank God, and we got to prepare all this unpredictable situation right now that spill over from the Ukraine war, and it's gonna be stopped. I hope so. Or it's gonna spread out all over the world. That is my concern, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Kim. Well, as a matter of fact, without responding to my question, well, directly, I think you already covered your answer in your very comprehensive answer, and I think you definitely seems to be suggesting that we, in fact, must be further strengthen the alliance with the United States, with which I agree, and then I think with which large number of Korean population agree. So, having so far talked about Russian invasion of Ukraine, I think we should be moving on to what Honorable Kim has already in fact referred to, which is impact that Russian invasion is having on Northeast Asia. So that's something I just wanted to enter into in our discussion today. And then the first question I wish to raise with the Honorable Weldon, and question would be this, which is that, well, as Honorable Kim has already suggested, it in fact seems to be the case that we cannot avoid this impact that Russian invasion is having upon security environment as well as economic environment in Northeast Asia. And I think that well, view is already being aired in Washington, D.C. as well. The other day, I was listening to Kurt Campbell, that's Indo-Pacific coordinator at the White House, who said United States now may have to prepare for two-front war. I was quite impressed hearing that, in the sense that that's something which United States gave up more than 10 years ago. And then now, this coordinator for Indo-Pacific, he was saying United States may have to prepare for two-front war. And then almost the same time, United States sent a very high-powered delegation to Chinese Taipei, headed by Admiral Merlin, who used to be chairman of Joint Chiefs, as well as Michel Flournoy, who used to be Undersecretary of Defense. So, well, Honorable Weldon, what do you think Russian invasion has impact? The Russian invasion has on Indo-Pacific strategy of the United States?
Well, I think it will depend upon whether or not President Putin is successful. And the way the Ukrainian people and the president and his leaders are fighting right now, I think that's creating some pause among those around the world, like China and perhaps Iran, that might think that they can accomplish things only through offensive systems. I spent a lot of time focusing on the Far East, in Seoul, traveling to Panmunjom to receive the remains of our troops with Sonny Montgomery, who was a general and a congressman. Then I led the delegations into Pyongyang, and I sat across the table from Kim Gai-kwang and met with Pak Nam-soon and the leaders of North Korea. And I can tell you, contrary to what I thought, they do want to have a dialogue, or they did back then. Unfortunately, today, the world has changed, and they've been able to develop their Taepodong and Nodong nuclear missiles and their long-range missiles much more aggressively than they were back when I went there. But the tone of the interactions that we had, and we met with the lead negotiator, Kim Gai-kwang, for 7 hours on one day. We actually came up with a two-part 10-point plan that would have allowed and would require them to give up their Yongbun reactor and renounce their nuclear program in a staged process. But in return for that, the six-party nations, at that time all involved, would have come up with a creative solution that I called the peace pipeline. Russia has a significant amount of energy up in Sakhalin that they can't get to the market. If you build a pipeline from Sakhalin down through China and follow the rail corridor down through North Korea to South Korea, you can provide an outlet for that Russian energy. China has the option to limit or control that energy. I actually spent a week in Wuhan, where the largest pipeline manufacturer is in China, and they were ecstatic to build the pipeline and guaranteed us the communist leaders would support that. So China would build the pipeline, Russia would sell their product. Kogas would be the company that would broker the sale of that gas to Japan, South Korea, and China. And in return for all of that, and DPR giving up its nuclear program, they would get a tipping fee, a source of income from all the energy going through the pipeline or pipelines. That process is a creative way to bring the six nations together so that all of them benefit. That's the kind of thinking that I think we need. Now, unfortunately, because North Korea has pursued more aggressive missile programs, South Korea needs to have the most robust missile defense systems that we have. And we've given that capability to both Japan and South Korea to defend against the North. But I'm also concerned about loose nukes, the loose nukes that the Soviets built that were never fully accounted for. I held 5 hearings with former KGB agents and the General Alexander Lebed and Alexander Yablokov, who testified in Congress that there were small demolition munitions that the Soviet Union and the US built. And one of those in the hands of North Korea could wreak havoc. But let me tell you my biggest concern for the Far East, for our allies in Korea and in Taiwan. The US in the 1960s developed a technology to use a nuclear burst in the atmosphere to create an EMP, electromagnetic pulse. When we did that test over Hawaii, we shut the island down. The US has mastered EMP, and so have the Russians, and so have the Chinese. If China wants to take over Taiwan, I do not predict it will be a military invasion. I believe they'll do an EMP over Taiwan and take Taiwan back to the Dark Ages. I did a briefing about 5 years ago at the invitation of General Kwan in Seoul, and I brought over the top EMP expert from the US because Korea has the same vulnerability. The use of EMP, whether nuclear or non-nuclear, is, in my opinion, the greatest threat to nations, especially in the Far East and the Middle East, along with cyber terrorism. And so I would encourage our friends in South Korea to put a significant amount of attention on both North Korea's offensive missiles, which you're doing, but also on the potential use of EMP that perhaps North Korea one day, heaven forbid, might get. But in the process of this, we must have dialogue. All this discussion about weapons and more systems, it's got to be. We've got to have the aggressive effort of engaging people. I traveled to North Korea. My government didn't want me to go. They tried to stop me. We went to Blue House. We briefed the president of South Korea, and your country was very much in favor. Sitting down with him, and I had the interpreter for the State Department with us, a very distinguished reporter today. You probably know Tong Kim. Tong Kim was with me on all 3 of our trips, and he said it was the most responsive he had ever seen the North Korean leaders. We weren't there to represent our country. We were there to show the face of America in support of our president. That needs to be done with North Korea, just like it needs to be done with Putin.
Well, Honorable Weldon, as a matter of fact, my question to you was, what in fact is your view about the impact the Russian invasion on Ukraine would have on Northeast Asia? And you went through, in fact, large number of, say very serious impact that it could be bringing upon Northeast Asia. And then you focused upon North Korea, you focused upon Taiwan, and then in the process of doing that, you talked about Rodong, you talked about Scud, and then as a matter of fact, North Korean missiles have come a long way since then. And then these days, for example, this year alone in January, they tested no less than 7 missiles, and then there was
Yes.
certain pattern in North Korean testers, which was that, with the exception of the seventh test, all 6 of them they were focused upon short distance missiles, as well as the missiles which can evade detection, meaning, say, Iskandar, meaning ATACMS, meaning hyperactive glide vehicles. These are the kind of missiles which can easily evade detection and interception. And then, of course, when they are testing all of them, then of course we must seriously ask ourselves, what is the military purpose of that? And I think it is very closely related with what North Korea has been saying recently, which is where they will focus upon development of tactical nuclear weapons. And then these, in fact, short-range missiles which can evade detection and interception, they in fact will be perfect vehicles to be used in case North Korea wishes to employ tactical nuclear weapons in the Korean Peninsula. So I think you're absolutely right. These are the technologies and weapon systems which are being developed, and this, in fact, very negative impact coming from Russian invasion of Ukraine, that in fact could give wrong message to, say, those kind of countries in Northeast Asia. So I think you're absolutely right, including your point about, say, pulse, the threat coming from the magnetic pulse. So thank you so much for your comments. So my
Can
second
I
question.
can I just
Oh,
interrupt just 1 second? Yeah,
Honorable Kim, please, of course, go
as
ahead.
you know that we have a kind of inviting through the FMC, inviting dozen of them each year around the June 25th, which is the ceremony of North Korea invasion. And I'd like to invite both of you to come to Korea. You'll get a chance to look around and you can see it, how close North Korea is, how close China, how close Russia is, and see how well we've been doing here. South Korea is unbelievably. We are eighth in GP, and a very wealthy nation, well advanced. People are pretty happy, but this is going on, and always kind of concerning about the Chinese reaction. I'm sure that Russia will call China, help them in Ukraine. What's going to happen to here? Precipitate to Korea also. I'm going to invite you over, if you don't mind, through the FMC. Come and stay with us about a couple of weeks, and you'll see all over the South Korea, and you'll agree with me that how well the South Korean people are happy the way it is right now, and got a new election, new president is a very strong pro-American, and we are all dependent on USA friendship heavily right now, and we're concerned, really concerned about this war way out there. And anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and invite you. Get ready sometime in June, okay? Spend about 2 3 weeks in Korea. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Honorable Bonker and Honorable Weldon, I very much hope that you'll be able to, say, take advantage of this kind of invitation coming from Honorable Kim. But having said that, I just wanted to raise my second question with Honorable Bonker, and then that is, even before Russian invasion of Ukraine. Then United States, in fact, was designing how to further strengthen the relationship among allies and partners in Northeast Asia. So United States, in fact, they were developing this relationship through Quad, through AUKUS, through free and open Indo-Pacific, and then now Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. And then all of them, in fact, I support all of them, in fact, because why? Because I think definitely it will help the security as well as economic prosperity of all the allies and partners of the United States in our part of the world. Having said that, uh, well, the important focus of them, of course, for understandable reason, would be focused upon security relationship. But at the same time, what we are observing these days is increasing trend of something called fragmentation of the market. Fragmentation of market in the sense of trade, in the sense of supply chain, in the sense of financing, in the sense of technology, etc., etc. So I think what I hope to see is all those architecture of institutions well that United States has been designing and developing. I very much hope that they in fact would be focused very effectively upon working with US allies and partners in our part of the world to take a, to take advantage of those institutions in addressing these challenges we have not only in the security sector but also in the economic sector. Is it, do you think what you are observing in the United States, do you think United States government is putting appropriate focus upon economic aspect of all those new institutions?
Well, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Kim, for the invitation. I'm scheduled to be on an FMC trip to South Korea on June 22nd, so hopefully we can meet in person.
That's the one. Yeah.
Also, yeah. Also, Congressman Weldon served on the Armed Services, I on Foreign Affairs. My expertise in Congress was international trade. But I can tell you, having Congressman Weldon on this panel, you cannot do better when it comes to armed services, security related issues, as you could tell by his responses. He's just excellent.
Thank
With
you, Don.
respect to the region, you're welcome. Our president was elected last year in his first year, or in his second. Yours was just elected on March 9th. And so everybody looks at what they've been saying and how that's going to formulate the policies, especially foreign policies going forward. And of course, much of that is bipartisan, but it's a matter of priority. And for America, it's been the Middle East, Russia, and China. But Southeast Asia, maybe North Asia as well, has been a priority. And with respect to the economic alliances and how that works to be beneficial to all the participating nations, during the Obama administration, they negotiated the Trans-Pacific Partnership that involved 12 of those countries. And at the time, it was seen as something that would be beneficial economically, but I think the Obama administration was trying to build an alliance with these participating countries to be a buffer to China's growing influence in those countries. Not military influence, he's not Putin, but economic influence, where they can effectively control a lot of these economies, and that gives them the upper hand. And so that was a major success, negotiating treaties among 12 countries, and especially on America's side to get a Congress to ratify, because the Democratic Party, thanks to organized labor unions, is anti-trade. And when Bush was president, they put the thumbs down on most of the bilateral or multilateral trade agreements. But in this case, that was a major success going forward. That alliance would have great meaning. But Donald Trump campaigned against it. And his first month in office, he ripped it up. And America opted out. And as a result, the participating nations, as you know, added a few more countries, and now they have their own, what is it called, a comprehensive and progressive agreement for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's kind of a lengthy title, but you got those countries now involved, and America is no longer the navigator. We're on the sidelines. And the basic question again is China's influence. When America is more or less involved, it has a lot of importance in terms of these bigger issues like US China. Now, we have Biden in office. You would think, since this happened in the Obama era, that Biden would renegotiate, get America back in that pact, that trade pact. But again, the unions are so powerful politically that he's just not going down that route. So it really comes down to, with respect to U.S. relationships in Asia, economic, which I've covered, and security, which has been covered by my colleague. But the most important question is China, their motives, their influence, how they're going to affect things. If they do go after Taiwan in whatever form, what are the consequences? How will it affect South Korea, Indonesia, and these other countries? So while we're coping now with this horrible situation in Ukraine, President Xi has the same kind of vision for getting Taiwan back in, just like Putin has in getting Ukraine back into the old Soviet realm. So is that going to be our next biggest and threatening challenge? Is China in Asia?
Thank you. Well, Honorable Bonker, I think that in fact is well, all the more important reason why, as we already were discussing, we should be making full use of all these regional institutions we're building for the time being, like Quad, like AUKUS, like well, Indo-Pacific economic framework, etc., etc. And then, as you rightly pointed out, I also think it will be very difficult to expect United States to come back and then join this CPTPP. But at the same time, at the very least, Korea, I think, must try and join CPTPP so that there will be Japan, there will be
Yes.
Australia, and there will be Korea, all the important allies of the United
Well,
States joining CPTPP and
Ambassador,
try to make it right.
let
Go,
me
go
ask you
ahead.
a question.
Right.
Even though we had negotiated a bilateral, why didn't South Korea get into that agreement?
Uh, well, when you say that agreement, you mean TPP? TPP?
Yes,
Right.
yes.
Well,
Why
well,
was,
well, well, Honorable Bunker, the thing is, I in fact came to Washington, D.C. In June 2013. So it was 1 year after the Chorus FTA,
yeah,
in fact, came into effect in March 2012. And then in 2012, I was the vice foreign minister here in Seoul. And I was suggesting that we, in fact, must come and participate in the negotiation for TPP. But the environment at the time was a kind of FTA fatigue. What I mean by that is this, which is that Chorus FTA was well, the most important, most extensive and comprehensive FTA that Korea joined. And after that, there was certain fatigue
hmm
about FTA. So there was no stomach to participate in another major trade negotiation. I'm talking about 2012. So I came to Washington in 2013 and then continued to suggest to Seoul we must not lose the time. We must not lose the momentum of come and joining this negotiation. But somehow my observation is we lost the momentum. So when you lost the momentum, then USTR at the time, it used to be a gentleman called Michael Froman, whom I have known for a long, long time. And Froman, he told me, Well, by now, I think it is too late. Maybe you will have to come and join TPP in the second batch. So that, in fact, was well, what United States was suggesting, for fear that, in fact, negotiating with 12 countries, it was not easy already. And when, in fact, they were making all this progress, and Korea comes to join the negotiation again as a new partner, that in fact could be holding down the whole process. That was the concern of USTR at the time. But anyhow, we couldn't join at the time. But even now, I think we must come and join. And I will join. Then I was just trying to tell you, I understand why United States cannot join, but at the same time, with Japan, with Australia, with Korea, all the staunch allies of United States in Asia Pacific, all be in CPTPP, and each three of them, they have in fact FTA with the United States. So maybe it in fact could be of certain say help to further strengthen the economic alliance relationship among all of us. So thank you so much, Honorable Bonka.
Yeah.
So
Well,
third
one
question,
more question.
please.
Politically in America, it's the unions that are against agreements. What about the agricultural and auto sectors in South Korea? Do they oppose these trade agreements? Because they
Well,
usually call for lowering tariffs, which makes,
well, 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 Honorable Bonka, the first FTA Korea joined, that was Korea-Chile FTA. The negotiation was completed in 2003. And at the time, I used to be Director General for International Trade. So I had to have the first FTA for Korea, go through the ratification in the Korean Congress, Korean National Assembly. It took me almost a year to make it go through the Korean National Assembly. Why was it so difficult? Because of farmers. Farmers, in fact, they
yeah.
didn't understand how FTA works. And then it was their view that if we join this FTA with Chile, then Korean agriculture, especially say
Hmm.
the fruit growers, they in fact would be devastated. It was their concern. But later on, they came to find it was not the case. So, in a sense, they learned through the process of how uh, Korea Chile FTA was implemented. And I think that helped us to go and negotiate other FTAs. When it comes to, say, auto sector, then, well, auto sector, in fact, was not much of an issue until we had the Chorus FTA. So, well, when it comes to auto sector, well, because of the importance of automobile industry in the United States, it in fact emerged as an important sector. But at the same time, we could get over it even if we had to have this additional complementary, say, negotiation afterwards. So by now, I think, say, agricultural sector and automotive sector, I think they wouldn't be too much of challenge for Korea when we try to, well, participate in a negotiation for CPTPP. Having said that, well, I wonder if I could raise my third question with Honorable Jay Kim, and we are still talking about the impact that Russian invasion of Ukraine is having upon Northeast Asia. And one country which would be very closely observing what is happening in Ukraine would be North Korea. And even before that, North Korean officials, they were saying, look at Colonel Gaddafi, look at Saddam Hussein. Had he be the case that they had nuclear weapons, then in fact they in fact could have avoided the very tragic end they met with. That in fact is something North Korean officials used to say from time to time. And I think they most probably watching what they are watching in Ukraine, North Korean officials could be led to say the same thing. And then, as Honorable Weldon already said, in fact, in case of Ukraine, then there were a large number of countries which signed Budapest Agreement, which in fact guaranteed security for Ukraine in return for Ukraine giving up nuclear weapons. So I think North Korea could be learning a negative lesson from this, and then there is a view that if there was a chance for North Korea to give up nuclear weapons, then in fact it would have become even the chance would become even slimmer. So that in fact is something large number of people are saying in Korea. So my question for Honorable Jay Kim would be this, which is given all of that as a fact, I think it will become even more important for Korea to try to think about what, say, additional leverage we could make use of in order to make North Korea to come to the negotiating table. And one of them would be, in a sense, innovative way of engaging China. So, what is your view on this subject? That is to say, how in fact jumpstart this negotiation for denuclearization with North Korea?
That's a very good question. I believe that we got to rely on new president, Mr. Yoon. I have a strong faith on him. If we fail Ukraine, we're going to be the next victim. God, they're going to say, wait a minute, that's easy. So South Korea will be our next victim. We got to make sure the Ukraine wins on this thing and the justice wins. So I think we got to get ready, whatever it is. And I think that you talk about talk. Well, I don't know. They've been tried several times, but they don't want to talk. Each time they had a ICBM testing, which is getting better and better. Now, you know situation of Seoul, how congested it is. My God, one bomb will destroy half of the Seoul city. I mean, this is really we are in really congested, small country, but our economy is pretty strong. We have USA supporting us. Now we got a new presidente, which is agree with our view, more I'm sorry, talk about Republican view. So we are in good shape. This is the time we gotta do something about this Ukraine, and I don't mean we're participating, but just we gotta get the lesson. And China is a big issue. I think we should have a talk with China and Korea, North Korea. Really, not just talk to talk. No, I always have a meeting, but never realized. So we gotta really have a serious talk with North Korea and China and make sure that they don't do stupid things and attacking South with ICBM. That's what I can say. We rely on new president. He's pretty smart. He's talking about this defense issue many times. Uh, Contrary to incumbent. So I think it's gonna good times coming up. Yeah, I agree with you. We gotta have a meeting. We gotta have a talk. We haven't met each other. I understand quite some time. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Kim. Well, now we have talked about, say, Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now we have talked about the impact it will have upon Northeast Asia. So, with all of that as a background, I think we should be moving on to the bilateral relationship between Korea and United States, especially in the context of this election we had just last week, and then where we have a new president elect. And then what was very impressive for me to observe was President Biden gave a call to President elect Yoon less than 5 hours after President elect Yoon made his acceptance speech. Well, I was really impressed with that well, timing in such short period of time that President Biden giving a call to President-elect Yoon, and then they had 20 minutes of conversation, but they covered all the necessary territory in my mind. So with that as a basis, let me turn to you, when uh, Honorable Bonker. The thing is, one of the things which both of them, that is to say, both President Biden as well as President Yoon, emphasized was the importance of further strengthening the alliance between Korea and United States. Well, as a matter of fact, not only two of them, but also, well, for example, well, Honorable Jay Kim, that again was something which in fact he has been emphasizing again and again, how to further strengthen the alliance between the two countries. So given your extensive experiences as a leader in the United States, so Honorable Bonker, what would be your advice to newly elected President Yoon, uh, how to further strengthen the alliance?
Well, thank you for the question. But first, let me say what Curt Weldon mentioned in his opening comment. Your election last week is a crown jewel of democracy. It was incredibly close, the closest in 30 years. And yet, integrity seemed to be the message beyond electing a new president. And we in America are struggling. You know, we all have our struggles. In South Korea, your former presidents have had to struggle with corruption charges and investigations and so forth. But our country today is struggling about how we elect presidents, whether our elections are done properly and fairly. And that is a serious challenge they're coping with today. And in some respects, both Ukraine and South Korea are standing out as examples or models of doing what's right. Ukraine, the heart of that country, everybody wanting to rally behind a president and maintain their dignity and defending their country. And in South Korea, with its election and transition of authority from one party to the other, in fact, the outgoing or the defeated party right away complimented and pledged his support. So that's a wonderful example for America and other countries. Congratulations. With respect to the bilateral relationship, in some respects, your newly elected president, Joe Biden, would be representing different political parties, one more conservative, the other more progressive. And so maybe on the domestic front, they would have differences. But I think when it comes to the bilateral relationship, they have much in common in terms of the alliance and the military preparedness. Now, the outgoing president met 3 times with the North Korean leader. He had also Donald Trump approaching that he was trying to build a relationship that would result in some kind of agreement where North Korea would dismantle. So both those leaders have reached out and they've tried to have dialogue, tried to find common ground and agreement. And the other pledge is, I think, President Moon to be president-elect, not Moon, but Yoon, wants to ratchet up the military operations and maybe strengthen the U.S. Korea military relationship to make it better prepared to deal with potential threats. So I think that our relationship is going to be stronger than ever with these 2 leaders going forward. But of course, it all comes down to China and how it might affect what goes on in Northeast Asia. I picked up somewhere in my little search that President Moon talked about strategic ambiguity to try to get along, build more relationships. Incoming President Yoon, strategic clarity, more aligned, I think, with Biden's tough position on North Korea. So the Korean Peninsula will continue to be a challenge and a priority for the U.S. government. But right now, it is so focused on Ukraine. There's hardly attention given to the other regions around the world. but we'll play catch up later on.
Right. Well, Honorable Bonko, thank you so much. And then you're absolutely right in the sense that, given what is happening in Ukraine, we fully understand how occupied President Biden would be. But even then, he found time and room in his mind to give a call to President-elect Yoon, less than 5 minutes after this acceptance speech by President-elect Yoon. As a matter of fact, that in fact is the reason why it was so impressive for me. And then talking about, say, election outcome, and then being the closest election ever in the Korean presidential history, Korean presidential election, then you're absolutely right. How close was it? It was 0.78%. The differences of few
Yeah.
ballots being obtained between the winner and loser, it was as close as 0.78%. But even then, as soon as Mr. Yoon made the acceptance speech, then Mr. Lee, in fact, he
Yes.
made concession speech. So it, in fact, was a beautiful, say, development in my mind. And having said that, let me turn to you, Honorable Weldon. And then the thing is, well, this is something which Honorable Jay Kim has already said, which is that how say the city of Seoul, how close it is to the DMZ, and then how populous the Seoul metropolitan city is, and then how detrimental the military attack from North Korea will be, and then all of that, in fact, is something we, in fact, when I say we Koreans, in fact, we do not talk about it all the time, but something we always feel just behind our back. And then the thing is, for one reason and another, there are increasing signs that North Korea, in fact, means business when it says, well, we will continue to develop nuclear weapons, we will continue to develop missiles, we will continue to develop tactical nuclear weapons. And this morning, there was an opinion poll which said 71% of South Korean citizens, they think there is no willingness on the part of North Korea to come for negotiation. So all of them, in fact, are making large number of Koreans to believe this extended deterrence being offered by the United States, we need something stronger. Well, maybe given the level of threat coming from North Korea, this extended deterrence coming from United States is not solid enough. So there are increasing number of people in Korea who suggest we must in fact redeploy U.S. tactical nuclear weapons in South Korea. There are increasing number of people in South Korea who say, well, between United States and NATO, they have nuclear sharing, well, plan. Why don't we elevate our relationship to the same level with NATO? Or even there are some people who say the only practical option we have is for South Korea to have its own nuclear program. So that, in fact, is something we observe in Korea. So what would you say to them, both in terms of when there is increasing, say, skepticism about the say solidity of ex- extended deterrence, as well as some of those suggestions being made, at least by some of the commentators in Korea.
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head for the most difficult challenge we face, and that is whether or not to pursue a nuclear program. That brings a lot of difficult baggage with it. As I said, I've been to the region many times. I led many delegations to China. I'm the only U.S. official that was invited to speak twice at the National Defense University of the PLA. We had 300 senior Chinese officers, and I had 13 members of Congress from both parties. When I finished my speech, I divided the room up and had the members interact directly with the young emerging Chinese military leaders. And amazingly, there was much more agreement than there was opposition. I'm one that believes in the Ronald Reagan philosophy of strength, but also for primarily the deterrent and not for use in war. I think we have to be strong, and I think Korea has to be strong. You're our strategic ally in the Far East. We rely on you. You rely on us. You need a strong defense, and so does Japan. And I think that's not just to fight conflicts or wars, but it's to show China and North Korea that our allies are going to be strong and friendly with us and have supportive relationships. But we don't want war in the end. I'm one that believes we can peacefully coexist with China. And I have many friends in the Chinese NGO community that we need to pursue. And my trips to North Korea, I always hear this, they don't want to talk. We had the most serious discussions with Kim Gaiguan and with the leader at that time was the father of Kim Jong un. And they actually said, we want to find a way to coexist. We don't want to face the prospect of regime change, but we don't know how to get that. And we have sent some mixed signals. And that's why creative solutions, that pipeline initiative that we put forth, would bring the six countries together. Russia needs to sell its oil. China would like to supply the pipe and use the oil. South Korea could then get the benefit of stability by using the energy as well as Japan and China. And in the end, we get to provide a funding source for North Korea only if they give up their nuclear program. Now, that's more difficult today than it was 15 years ago, but I still think it's attainable. And I still think that that approach needs to be pursued while building strong defenses. And we need to support you on our most robust missile defense systems, on our technology for cybersecurity, and on the technology to defeat an EMP if it were to be used against you. But there's one more point that I would say to your new president. You have a strong, stable relationship with the U.S. Use your leaders at Kita. When I came to Korea, I met with them frequently, and your business leaders are outstanding. Let's build relationships even stronger in the area of trade, as Congressman Bonker mentioned. Use your diaspora. We have millions of Korean Americans who love their homeland. Use those organizations to create new interactive communications and new strategies to bring our people closer together because those NGOs have existed for decades. Use your members of parliament. We should have aggressive parliamentary exchanges between your Congress and our Congress, but also with the Japanese Diet and with the People's Congress in China, bringing and even the Russian Duma when we get through this current crisis. We need to have that parliamentary exchange because they're the future leaders of those countries, and that needs to be robust. And finally, and I did this when we developed a plan for Ukraine and Russia. We identified all of the NGOs that exist on their own in healthcare, in the environment, in trade, in energy, in security. There were hundreds of them. We should do an inventory of the NGOs in our countries, and we should have a focused effort to have them develop regional agendas for the Far East, for the countries surrounding Korea, bringing them together in ways that already exist. I'm very I'm very excited about your new leader. You had a close election. We had a close election in America, but in your country, you came together very quickly. I want your leader to know that our arms are open in America for a new, more stable, more solid Korean relationship, if that's possible. I don't know how we get there because you're already our strategic ally in your part of the world. But we must be strong. We must give you the systems. We must work together on those systems, but we must not rely on military alone. I remember meeting with Colonel Gaddafi. I took the first delegation to Libya. In the second delegation, I brought Joe Biden with me. It was very rare that senators travel with House delegations. But Joe, as a friend of mine, saw the success. I called him. I said, Joe, they want me to speak to the Jamahiriya in Libya, to all the people. Will you come? He said, yeah, Kurt, I'll come. So Joe came on the second trip, and Joe spoke to the entire country as I did. When we met with Gaddafi in the tent, and I met with him 4 times, he said, my biggest concern, and from those that are my neighbors, is can we trust your country that you won't try to remove me? I'll guarantee you that North Korea is looking at that scenario. I'll guarantee you that other nations are looking at whether or not we can be a viable partner. And that's something we have to work on in America. We should not be about regime change. We should be about building coalitions for new governments that represent all of the people. You're a shining example of that in Korea. And I'm so proud that I was being given the honor to speak with the distinguished panelists here today, but also to the people of your country who are America's best friends in the Far East. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Weldon. Well, as a matter of fact, I think I fully agree with you when you said that, well, government to government relations is important, but at the same time, there are a large number of other actors, including members of parliament, including diaspora, including business community, including NGOs, etc., etc. So let us just try to make full use of all those actors that we have, both in the United States and Korea, so that they could be working at their own level to further strengthen and cement the relationship between Korea and the United States.
Ambassador, let me give you
Definitely,
one example. During my
right.
time in Congress, I organized all the firefighters in America. That caucus
Hmm.
that I formed is now 32 years old. We will have our
Wow.
33rd dinner next month. Joe Biden was my
Hmm.
co chairman the entire time. Steny Hoyer is still
Wow.
the co chairman. Al
Hmm.
Gore, John McCain. Today, it's the largest caucus in the Congress with 360 members. The success we've had in America, I formed an NGO. I'm not being paid a dime to organize all the first responders worldwide. If you look at every nation, the most respected people among the people are the firefighters and the paramedics doing the job that you see in Ukraine today. Every photo you see from Ukraine, you see firefighters and paramedics. And these people aren't driven by power or money. I used to be a firefighter, I was a fire chief, so I understand. So, what we're doing through One World for Life is we're organizing the 25 million first responders in every nation in the world. If we build a network of those leaders who are respected in their communities as they are in America, there's nothing we can't accomplish working together. So, separate from politics, we're building a coalition of people who really protect the citizens of every nation in the world, whether they're our friend or their enemy. They're the kind of strategies that I think we should be looking for separate from our governments.
Thank you so much, Honorable Weldon. Well, Honorable Kim, well, you will have the honor of addressing the last question for today, and then the question again would be, based upon this conversation which was held between President-elect Yoon and then President Biden, which was one of the things they discussed was the importance of further strengthening trilateral cooperation among Korea, United States, and Japan. So there was something which both of them agreed to, but at the same time, you know it, I know it, how delicate and sophisticated the relationship is between Korea and Japan. And then there are some people in Korea who believe that maybe United States could play a catalyst role to make our two countries, Korea and Japan, move ahead. Do you agree? And then if so, how?
Yes, I agree. I think they've been repeatedly reminding us that we should join Quad. Quad was initiated by Japan, and we are kind of reluctant to joining it. Or still up in the air, but President um, USA keep telling us that you got to join Quad and Quad. Um, I think we should join, but only concern we have is Chinese reaction. If China doesn't like it, then we are scared the hell out of us. We have a lot of economy rely on China. They are so close by. China is a big concern to us, and they're too big. We are borderline, so that will keep repeating again and again. But that can be resolved by the good friendship with the USA. Remember, last year we had 16 members join, and we go to all of the places. A lot of Koreans are sort of crying and tell them how appreciated they joined this Korean War. And 40, 50,000 US soldiers died. And they never forget that. And my friends told me this is the only country never forget, and every year June 25th they have invited USA members, and this time we're taking over now our groups, so we're going to do again this year. So that relationship is never will never be softened. So I wouldn't worry about that. We're going to stay as a big allies many years to come. Now, forgot the question, by the way. What was your question again?
The relationship among Korea, United States, and Japan,
Well, I think I
and then
said enough on that one. That is just, I'm telling you that my American friends, my former members, telling me he been to different countries, never, never in Korea so welcoming us, and some of them cry. So I wouldn't say any further than that. Just come in and see and meet them, and we show the appreciation. That was way back in when Korean War, but still remember. And anyway, is that the question? I think we did a pretty good job, and Kurt Weldon. I didn't know you firemen's involved in firemen. That's good. We had a big fire. Oh God, it was and the firemen's kind of work with sacrifice their lives, and they did a wonderful job. Oh,
You have
it's a
great
huge
firefighters in
fire.
Korea. They're among
Yeah,
the best
huge
in the world.
fire. Yeah, and
Yeah.
they controlled it. Just appreciate that. And you're surprised to see how politics this year, how well done. The guy has lost 0.1% or something, but never had any riots, never had any street riots or anything, and go to the house, shops and stealing, and never happened. Quietly transferred. Now that I'm just really surprised. Even USA, we had a little problems, and and but I think Korea has reached the point that we are the no longer what you call it. We are in advanced countries group right now, and I think I'm very proud that I came to Korea and joined them. This is a great country. You'll see it next year. Trust not next year. Next, that's right, June. And yeah, no, this year, June. Trust me. Yeah, please come to the our invitation. Chosun Daily Finance mostly, and they did a good job each year. I really appreciate that, and that's the little appreciation we try to show you. Okay, I said too much. I'm not supposed to say too much. Thank you very much
Thank
again for inviting me, and my God, the two gentlemen, thank you very much for Kurt and Don. It's been a long time I seen you. Some of you, one of
Long
you,
time.
look little older than I remember, Don. But then I'm old too, Kurt. Good to see you again. Thank you.
Good to see you again.
well, as a matter of fact, Honorable Kim, he already said what I wanted to say, which is that I just wanted to just wrap up by thanking you, Honorable Don Bonker, Honorable Curt Weldon, Honorable Jay Kim, for your time and for your wisdom. And then what I can assure you is this, which is that transition committee has already been formed. I mean, election was on March the 9th, and then today is March 15th, and then the transition committee has already been formed, and then there are seven, say, committees at the transition committee, and then there is one committee which in fact is in charge of foreign and then security policy, and the chairman for that committee is a very good friend of mine, uh, Professor Kim, who used to be vice chairman of vice minister of foreign affairs during the same time with me. I used to be the first vice foreign minister, and Professor Kim used to be the second vice foreign minister. So we in fact have been buddy and buddies for a long, long time. And then now he's a chairman of Foreign and the Security Affairs Committee. So what I can assure you is, I in fact listened to you very carefully, and thank you so much for what you have shared with us. And I will make sure that my good friend, Professor Kim, would in fact be able to, well, benefit from all these well opinions and comments and suggestions coming from you. Thank you so much, and I look
Thank you.
forward to seeing. I look forward to
Soon.
seeing you. You, in fact, have already been invited by Jay Kim, so I very much look forward to seeing you as well when you come and visit Korea in June. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.